My son, Alexander, froze my access to our joint savings account and waited for me to break, to call him in tears, pleading for scraps. 3 weeks went by, and I never once picked up the phone. When he finally showed up at my door unannounced and spotted the unfamiliar sleek black sedan parked in my driveway, his face drained of color and his hand started to shake. But I need to take you back to how it all began. I was at the checkout counter in the local supermarket, my cart filled with the careful selections I always made: fresh produce, ground beef for his favorite chili recipe I still kept in my head, detergent, and my heart medication. Even though the account held more than enough, I never lost the habit of pinching pennies, the one I'd honed over decades of making ends meet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, and the air smelled faintly of bleach and overripe bananas from the nearby display. The total came to $156.84. I slid my debit card through the reader, the same card I'd used without issue for years. The machine beeped sharply. Declined. I tried again, forcing a polite smile for the young cashier, my throat tightening as I felt eyes on me. Declined once more. Heat flooded my cheeks, a burning wave that spread down my neck as the line behind me grew restless. Someone coughed, another shopper shifted their weight with an audible sigh, the plastic bags rustling like accusations. The cashier's eyes flicked between pity and impatience, her fingers hovering awkwardly over the keys. I had no choice but to abandon the full cart and walk out empty-handed, my head lowered against the sting of humiliation that clung to me like the chilly autumn air outside. Back home, my fingers trembled as I opened the banking app, the screen's cold glow illuminating my shaking hands in the dim kitchen light. Access restricted. Contact account owner for changes. I called the bank immediately, after endless hold music that grated against my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. A representative informed me in a flat, impersonal tone that the primary account holder had removed my privileges entirely. Only he could reverse it now. Alexander, my only child. The boy I'd raised alone after his father walked out when he was barely 4, leaving me with nothing but bills and a toddler's endless questions. The son I'd convinced 2.5 years earlier to put the account solely in his name so he could handle things for me as I got older, as my hands grew arthritic and my eyes tired from years of night shifts. How utterly naive I'd been to hand over that power to the person I loved most in the world, believing blood meant unbreakable trust. If this story resonates with you even a little, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone who should have your back, please subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like mine, and I'd love for you to stay with me for the next one. I sank into the worn recliner in my living room, the same one Alexander used to curl up in as a child, while I came home bone-tired from double shifts at the nursing home, my feet throbbing in soaked socks from winter slush. The fabric was faded now, threadbare in places, carrying the faint scent of the lavender sachets I'd tucked into the cushions years ago. I stared at the modest walls of the apartment I'd paid for with decades of scrubbing floors, changing bedpans, skipping meals so he could have new sneakers or college textbooks. Everything I'd sacrificed had been for him, to give him the chances I never had, the stability I clawed from nothing. Now here I was, cut off from the money I'd spent a lifetime earning and saving, unable to buy groceries or refill prescriptions. My finger hovered over his contact in my phone, the screen blurring slightly as tears welled up. I could call, ask what happened, beg him to fix it. The thought twisted in my gut like a knife. What if he laughed? What if he dismissed me again? But a cold clarity settled in my chest, heavy and unyielding. This wasn't an accident. Alexander had done it deliberately, expecting me to come crawling, desperate and grateful for whatever crumbs he tossed my way. I set the phone down with deliberate slowness, my hand steadying against the armrest. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Not today. Maybe not ever. I opened the pantry, the hinges creaking in the quiet apartment. A half-empty bag of rice, some canned tomatoes, a few potatoes softening at the edges, a jar of peanut butter. Enough for a week if I stretched it, measuring each grain like I had in the lean years. I'd survived worse, nights when the electricity got shut off and we huddled under blankets by candlelight, Christmases when gifts were handmade because there was nothing else. The memory brought a faint, bitter smile. I would survive this, too. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting with the distant hum of traffic outside, memories flooding back like a cruel slideshow. The signs had been there for months, years even. I'd just refused to see them, burying the hurt under layers of hope. The way his visits dwindled to hurried drop-bys, always with an excuse ready. The phone calls that grew clipped and distracted, his voice echoing with impatience. The way his wife, Lauren, always greeted me with a tight smile that never reached her eyes, her perfume lingering sharply in the air like a barrier. I remembered the last time I'd shown up at their house unannounced, 6 months ago, carrying a homemade apple pie because Alexander used to devour them as a boy, the warm scent of cinnamon filling my car on the drive over. Lauren answered the door in workout clothes, earbuds dangling, her forehead glistening with sweat. "We're kind of in the middle of something, Beatrice," she said, not even inviting me in, her tone clipped like I was an interruption in her perfect schedule. Alexander appeared behind her, scrolling on his phone, the glow reflecting off his face. He barely glanced up. "Hey, Mom, bad timing." No hug, no thank you for the pie that cooled in my hands as I walked away, the rejection settling cold and heavy in my stomach. Even then I'd made excuses, whispering them to myself on the bus ride home as rain pattered against the windows. They're busy building their life. Young couples have so much on their plates. What a fool I'd been to swallow every slight and call it understanding, to pretend the growing distance was just life pulling us apart. The next morning I forced myself out of bed, the floorboards cool under my bare feet, and took stock. $28 in my purse, crumpled bills that felt pathetically light. That was it, my entire net worth. At 65, I was essentially penniless because I'd trusted my own son. The realization hit like a slap, sharp and sobering. Fear tried to claw its way in, whispering dark possibilities. What if I got sick again? What if the money ran out completely? But I pushed it down, gripping the kitchen counter until my knuckles whitened. I'd raised a child alone, worked until my body ached, kept a roof over our heads through storms and shortages. If I could do all that with nothing, I could do this. By the end of the first week, the rice was nearly gone. I'd lost a few pounds, nothing drastic, but enough that my clothes hung looser, the mirror showing cheekbones I hadn't seen in years. I spent hours sitting by the window, the afternoon sun warming my face as I watched neighbors come and go, mothers with their grown children laughing together, their voices carrying faintly through the glass. The ache in my chest was physical some days, a tight knot that made breathing shallow. Still, I didn't call. Each time the urge rose, I felt the weight of that supermarket humiliation again, the judgmental stares burning into my back. One afternoon, while rationing a single potato for dinner, the skin peeling under my knife in thin, curling strips, my doorbell rang. My heart leapt, stupidly hopeful, a flicker of what if it's him? I opened it to find my neighbor, Ruth, a kind widow in her 70s, I'd exchanged pleasantries with over the years. She held a casserole dish, steam rising gently from under the foil, carrying the rich scent of tomatoes and cheese. "I noticed you haven't been out much," she said gently, her eyes soft with concern. "Thought you might like some lasagna." I nearly broke down right there, the warmth of the dish seeping into my hands like a lifeline. Instead, I invited her in, the apartment feeling smaller, cozier with her presence, and over tea the whole story spilled out: the account, the supermarket humiliation, my silence. My voice cracked in places, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Ruth listened without judgment, her wrinkled hands folded calmly around her cup. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her skin paper-thin but strong. "Beatrice, you're stronger than he knows, and you don't have to do this completely alone." She left me the casserole and, quietly, a grocery store gift card for $100. "No rush to pay it back," she whispered before leaving, her brig brief but firm. "Just eat." That small act of kindness kept me fed for another 10 days, the lasagna reheated slice by slice, filling the apartment with comfort I hadn't felt in weeks. And it reminded me that decency still existed in the world, even if not from the person I'd expected it from, a quiet reminder that not all doors were closed. At the 15-day mark, something shifted. I'd been sitting at my kitchen table staring at an old photo of Alexander at 8, grinning gap-toothed in front of the Christmas tree I'd somehow managed to afford that year, the colored lights twinkling in his wide eyes. My eyes filled with tears, but they weren't just sadness anymore. Anger, cold, righteous anger burned beneath them, warming my veins like strong coffee. I opened my laptop, an ancient thing I rarely used, its fan whirring loudly in the silence, and started researching: elder financial abuse, joint accounts, legal rights to pensions. The screen's blue light cast shadows across the room as I printed pages at the library using Ruth's gift card for copies, the printer's hum a small victory. One document in particular caught my eye: a bank statement from 2 years ago showing my monthly widow's pension of $1,450 being deposited regularly. That money was legally mine, regardless of whose name was on the account. The paper felt solid in my hands, tangible proof. I tucked the printout into an envelope, my fingers limbering on the edges. Proof, concrete proof. I still didn't call Alexander, but for the first time I felt a flicker of power, like sunlight breaking through clouds. A small turn. I had evidence now. If he wanted to play this game, I wasn't entirely defenseless. 3 weeks to the day he'd frozen me out, my doorbell rang again. The sound jolted me, my pulse quickening with a mix of dread and defiance. This time when I opened it, Alexander stood there in his expensive coat, the wool still holding the crisp outdoor chill, looking impatient. His gaze swept past me to the driveway where a sleek black sedan now sat, borrowed from a new friend I'd made through the senior center Ruth had convinced me to visit, its polished surface gleaming under the streetlight. "Whose car is that?" he demanded, voice sharp, his breath visible in the cool evening air. I met his eyes calmly, standing a little taller in the doorway. "A friend's. What are you doing here, Alexander?" He shifted, clearly thrown, his polished shoes scuffing against the welcome mat. "You haven't called. I figured you'd need help by now." The words hung between us, dripping with entitlement, the faint scent of his cologne reminding me of better days. "I've managed," I said simply, my voice steady despite the storm inside. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching. "Look, Mom, maybe we got our wires crossed with the account. If you need money, just ask." There it was, the line I'd been waiting for, the smug assumption that I'd beg. My heart pounded, but I held his gaze. "I don't need to ask," I replied, my voice steady, the envelope of proof burning a hole in my mind. "That pension is mine by law. I have the statements to prove it. Restore my access, Alexander, or I'll have no choice but to involve people who can make you." His face flushed red, eyes widening in shock. "You'd threaten your own son?" "I'm not threatening," I said, the words tasting like steel. "I'm informing. You left me without means to buy food or medicine. That's not a misunderstanding, that's abuse." He opened his mouth, closed it, then spat, "You ungrateful—" He stopped himself, but the word hung there anyway, sharp as a slap. I closed the door before he could finish, the click of the lock echoing in the quiet hallway. Leaning against it, my breath came in shallow bursts, but beneath the tremor was something new, relief, maybe even pride. That small confrontation, my first stand, felt like breathing fresh air after weeks underwater, the apartment suddenly larger, brighter. I'd drawn a line, and he knew I wasn't bluffing. The next day, I took the bus downtown to a legal aid office for seniors, the city streets blurring past the window in a haze of gray buildings and hurried pedestrians. The attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, reviewed my documents and nodded grimly, her office smelling of fresh coffee and old paper. "This is textbook financial exploitation," she said, her voice cutting through my lingering doubt. "We can file for an emergency order to restore access and pursue damages. And Beatrice, there's no cost to you. This is what we do." For the first time in weeks, hope felt real, blooming warm in my chest like the first sip of tea on a cold morning. Over the following days, Claire gathered more records. My pension deposits totaled over $78,000 in the past 4 years alone, yet Alexander had been withdrawing freely, $9,200 to a luxury watch retailer 18 months ago, $14,500 for a vacation the year before that, thousands more on dinners and gadgets that smelled of extravagance I'd never known. While I stretched pennies, counting each one under the kitchen light, he lived large on my retirement, the betrayal twisting deeper with every line item. Claire also uncovered something else, a forgotten retirement fund from my 30 years as a nurse's aide, $9,200 I'd never claimed, buried in paperwork I'd long forgotten. She helped me file immediately, her pen scratching confidently across forms. Meanwhile, a man named Thomas began visiting. I'd helped him decades ago when he was a broke young veteran, sleeping on a park bench near the hospital where I worked, the rain-soaked nights still vivid in my memory. I'd brought him sandwiches for weeks until he got on his feet, the simple act feeling like nothing at the time. He'd never forgotten. Now, a successful contractor, Thomas offered quiet support, groceries delivered in brown paper bags that filled my fridge with fresh smells, company over coffee where his deep laugh eased the silence, and eventually the loan of his late wife's car so I could get around independently, the keys cool and heavy in my palm. Bit by bit, my world expanded, the days filling with small purposes. I wasn't waiting for rescue, I was building my own, one careful step at a time. Alexander tried calling twice after our confrontation. I let it ring, the vibration buzzing against the table like an unwelcome insect. When he texted demanding I stop being dramatic, the words glowing accusingly on the screen, I forwarded the message to Claire with a simple note, evidence. My finger hesitated only a second before hitting send. 6 weeks after he cut me off, Claire filed the lawsuit. The demand letter cited specific transactions, withdrawal of $9,200 on 6/14/2023 to Prestige Jewelers, $14,500 on 09/02/2023 to Elite Travel Agency. Alexander received it certified mail, he had to sign, the confirmation arriving like a small triumph. He called in a panic that evening, his voice cracking through the speaker. "Mom, please, we can work this out privately. You don't want to drag this through court." "I gave you the chance to work it out privately," I replied calmly, sitting straight in my recliner, the evening light fading outside. "You chose not to. Now the court will decide." "You'll ruin me," he shouted, the desperation raw. "No, Alexander," I said quietly, the words steady despite the ache. "You did that yourself." I hung up, the silence afterward feeling earned. The preliminary hearing was set for late spring. In the months leading up, my life transformed. The retirement fund money arrived, $9,200 deposited into a new account in my name only, the notification chime on my phone like music. State assistance for seniors kicked in, $220 monthly for food and medical, steady and mine. Thomas helped me buy a reliable used car of my own, a silver 2019 Honda Civic with low mileage, the new car smell lingering faintly as I turned the key for the first time. I took driving refresher courses, the instructor's patient voice guiding me through turns that felt like reclaiming freedom. I painted again for the first time since Alexander was small, the watercolors blooming vibrant on paper under my careful brush. I joined a book club at the senior center, the discussions filling evenings with voices and laughter. Ruth, Cecilia, Thomas's sister, and I started a weekly coffee group, 3 women who understood betrayal and rebuilding, our conversations lingering over steaming mugs like old friends. Alexander's first settlement offer came through his attorney, restore access and $10,000 for inconvenience. Claire laughed when she read it, the sound sharp and satisfying. We're countering for full restitution of misused funds, $48,000 documented, plus the $15,000 personal loan you gave him for their house down payment 5 years ago with interest. He'd promised to repay that loan in a year, his handshake firm back then. 5 years later, nothing. The broken promise, another scar. The day of the hearing arrived, the spring air crisp with blooming flowers, as I dressed carefully in a new navy suit I'd bought with my own money, the fabric smooth against my skin. Thomas drove me, his steady presence calming my nerves. Claire met us outside the courthouse, her briefcase swinging confidently. Alexander was already there with Lauren and their attorney. When he saw me, head high, flanked by support, the sun catching on my silver hair, his composure cracked, his eyes darting away. Inside, the judge reviewed the evidence projected on screenum: deposit records, luxury withdrawals, my abandoned grocery cart receipt I'd kept as proof of hardship, crumpled but damning. When the judge asked Alexander to explain spending $9,200 on jewelry while his mother went hungry, he stammered, his voice echoing weakly in the room. "It was for family." "Your mother's pension is not a family slush fund," the judge said coldly, his gavel resting like a warning. "This borders on elder abuse." Settlement talks during recess were tense, voices hushed in the hallway that smelled of polished wood and tension. Alexander's final offer, immediate access restored, $50,000 lump sum, the $15,000 loan repaid in full, and a signed agreement never to touch my finances again. I accepted, on condition the agreement be notarized that day and payments wired before we left the building, my voice firm as I signed, the pen steady in my hand. By 4 p.m. it was done, my access restored, $65,000 hitting my new account by close of business, the confirmation email a quiet victory. Walking out of the courthouse into spring sunshine, the warmth soaking into my skin, I felt lighter than I had in years, the weight finally lifting. The months since have been a quiet revolution. I renovated my apartment, fresh paint in soft blues that made the rooms feel airy, new furniture with cushions that hugged me gently, plants everywhere trailing green leaves that caught the light. I travel with Ruth and Cecilia, weekend trips to the coast where the salt air cleared my mind, a cruise none of us thought we'd ever take, the ocean vast and healing. I volunteer at the senior legal aid office twice a week, helping other women spot the signs I missed, their grateful eyes mirroring my own past pain. Alexander makes the occasional awkward overtures, birthday cards with checks tucked inside, stiff apologies at my granddaughter Lily's school events, his words halting in the crowded gym. I accept the money, remain polite for Lily's sake, nodding curtly, but the closeness is gone. Some damage can't be undone, the scar tissue too thick. Lily is my joy. I pick her up every Tuesday and Thursday, her small hand slipping into mine as we drive home, the car filled with her chatter. We bake, do homework, talk about everything, her dreams, her little worries. She knows Grandma fought for herself, and she tells me often, hugging me tight, she wants to be strong like me when she grows up, her words warming me deeper than any sun. This morning I sat on my balcony, new wicker chairs creaking softly, coffee steaming in my hand with its rich, comforting aroma, watching the sunrise I used to sleep through while waiting for phone calls that rarely came, the sky painted in pinks and golds that felt like a promise. I am Beatrice Harlow, 65 years old, financially secure, surrounded by real friends, loved fiercely by my granddaughter, living fully on my own terms. And I am enough. To every woman who's ever felt erased by the people meant to cherish her most, your story matters too. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who should have protected you? Have you reclaimed your life after betrayal? Share below. I read every comment, and together we remind each other we're never alone. If my journey touched you, subscribe to the channel and stay with me. There are more stories of strength and second chances ahead. You're not alone, we're in this together.